Welcome to Interviews with Innocence, a podcast about spirituality, consciousness, and exploring the wisdom our children bring into this world. I believe that our very young children are our greatest teachers. After all, they're the masters of living in the present moment, bubbling in unconditional love, enjoying the messiness of life, and curious about the universe in all its dimensions. The pure essence that young children exhibit lives within all of us. My hope is that these interviews will help us discover, embrace, and connect with the sacred core of childhood that resides within each of our hearts. I am your host, Marla Hughes. Today, I'm thrilled to have Lesley Joan Lupo back on the show. Lesley is an intuitive practitioner at Canyon Ranch, and she's been there for 23 years. And she is internationally known for her accuracy. A gifted healer, NLP specialist, and near-death experiencer, she has a unique and rare gift for explaining the science behind intuition and spiritual phenomena. After being killed by a stampede of horses, her profound near-death experience resulted in her groundbreaking book entitled, Remember, Every Breath is Precious. Dying Taught Me How to Live. Lesley was born in Chicago and raised in a boisterous Sicilian, is that right? Did you just say that? Sicilian?
Yes.
Yes, family. She attended college in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and graduated with a B.A. in psychology and a B.F.A. in studio art. At the same time that she studied science, art, and psychology, Lesley reawakened her intuitive awareness and crossed paths with many inspirational teachers, including Native American medicine. Welcome back to the program, Lesley.
Hello.
Today, we are here to talk about the children that have been coming into this world for a while, and the lessons that they're bringing, and the energy and the magic. And I know you talked about in your book bodhisattva. And I did not know what I actually thought that was a word that you made up or something when I first heard you talk about it in an interview. And then I'm taking a class in Buddhism, and then I realized that it is it's about attaining the Buddhahood. And it says something that I read, a bodhisattva is a being who has taken the bodhisattva vow to help save all sentient beings before going into full nirvana or enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
The term is also used for human beings who have taken the bodhisattva vow to heart to such an extent that they will keep it even in their next lives. So let's talk a little bit about that. What are these bodhisattva kids that are coming in?
Well, that conversation came up when I'm very curious. I'm always asking questions. When I was little,
Yes.
used to send me home, but I just love.
That's so sad.
I'd always find someone. I loved encyclopedias, but
Right.
what I said was, what will I do if I come up here, if I do stay? I wanted to have an objective view to what are my options if I go back to Earth? What are my options if I stay? And this.
Right. Let me interrupt one second. For people who are listening to this and haven't listened to the first interview, please go back and listen, because Lesley is talking about after the accident, and she actually passed over to the other side, and she was given a choice whether she would come back to this earthly realm or stay in that amazingly beautiful place. So anyway, and she calls you call that upstairs.
Yes. I didn't know what to call it when they came back.
Yes. I
was kind of almost borderline atheist. I couldn't have said heaven. So I kind of came back like, okay, what was that all about? So my group was in charge of placing one of the types of bodhisattvas that do come down. And you're right. The definition is, the way I understand it too, is that when you're incarnating, you get to a place where you no longer have to incarnate and you can go into heaven permanently, and then many people say, no, I won't go into heaven. The bodhisattva vow that the Dalai Lama talks about is, I will return again and again until all sentient beings are awakened. And that's the gist of it. So Mina was explaining this to me with a lot of pictures and information about how when Homo sapiens was the first incarnation of humans that could fully evolve to conceptualize God in the wonderful co-creating, adoring God, but feeling adored, not being afraid of God. And that was right now it's 160,000 or 170,000 years, but every few years they kick it back a notch. But Homo sapiens has been here. And what Mina showed me was that older souls would incarnate into this group of humans to be a spiritual guide. And those were the first bodhisattvas. They tend to be very egoless. They tend to be drawn to the divine, to working like for spiritual awareness themselves. And they tend to be born into families that recognize the spiritual gift of the child and will take them to the shaman or the convent or the monastery or become a rabbi or a Brahmin, because these children are very gifted, but the families they're born into notice it and help it. So
Right.
the second group, what Mina showed me was in the mid-1800s, global consciousness had connected enough to where another level came in. And these were what I first called the blindfolded bodhisattvas, because the bodhisattva is born with a yearning to serve God in whatever culture they're in, and will use those tools to serve God. The blindfolded bodhisattva is born into a much younger family, and they don't identify with the culture or the exclusivity, my path right, everyone else is going, wrong. And they look around and they kind of feel like that ugly duckling, the little swan that doesn't realize that there's nothing wrong with being a duck, but he's not a duck. And until he sees swans, then he knows who he is. But they're brought in for a couple of really specific purposes. Many families pass on generational hatred and prejudices. They're taught those things. Babies are not born hating and prejudice. They're not. Babies, children's, toddlers have no qualm about talking to someone with a different color skin or hair or missing an arm. They don't really pay attention to that. They seem to be able to connect by the heart. And so these things are taught. So it's kind of like when you think about the Hatfield and McCoy feud, those kids are trained to carry the burden of the pain that my great-great-great-great-grandfather went through. And these kids cannot be taught that. These blindfolded bodhisattvas can just shake their head and say, no, that just doesn't make sense. I can't do it. They're also exceptionally forgiving. They will forgive again and again. And they are elevating true forgiveness where they don't hold grudges. And they're here to break that chain of any type of generational prejudices, whether it's sexist or religion or country or skin color, gender. They're allowing that everyone is equal in God's eyes. I mean, that's the truth. That's the unconditional love. Every human being on the planet is a son or daughter of God and have the right for that. And that's what the blindfolded bodhisattvas are doing, because they absolutely cannot be taught prejudices, but they feel like an outcast. They feel like, I've had so many letters. That's the number one thing that I get from my book, is these people that are saying, oh my God, I thought I was a changeling. And when they realize that there's a reason for that kind of isolation as a child, and that fact that they stuck to their principles and to what has turned out to be a higher experience. Like I had one client share with me a story in which she was so she was accused, she was very popular in high school, accused of doing something really bad, and very ostracized as cliques go. And instead of becoming bitter and bully like the people that had turned her world upside down, the fellow students, she's now a lawyer for workplace violations. And so she took that pain and transmuted it into a service to others. So, and she's a blindfolded bodhisattva. And they kind of absorb the negativity and they transmute it into love and forgiveness. And that's a really critical thing, is true forgiveness. And then also, again, the last one is love forgiveness. And the one thing more, they have to begin to learn how to play, because these blindfolded bodhisattvas are coming down for a service. And they are so unaware of who they are that they get, whenever an older soul, any older soul, is raised and sees things like hatred or bullying, or selfishness or narcissism, they kind of can become selfless to a fault. So the blindfolded bodhisattvas have to learn to have boundaries. And that unconditional and loving does not mean vulnerability. Unconditional love, in my definition of it, is truly understanding that every person is God's child, but I decide who I am emotionally, physically, or financially vulnerable to. So I can have, someone in my family who would make Mother Teresa look, or Joan Crawford look like Mother Teresa, and I can still be loving and patient with them, but I can love them at a distance, kind of thing. It's more like having some gentle boundaries.
Right. Interesting. And just a couple of things I wanted to, just talking about love. This really touched me when you talked about the story of Quanian. Is that the word Quinian, or the person who was shown, who heard at the cry of a baby?
Oh, Kuan Yin.
Kuan Yin, yeah. And I think the reason I want you to share it is because I was just thinking about this. I think that's how many of us remember that incredible love.
Yeah.
And it's because of the love for our children. Yeah. So can you tell that story?
Yes. She was the first person attributed with bodhisattva. She was the first being that, again, in the cycle of the Eastern religions that have the concept of reincarnation, she's the first one in recorded history that said on her deathbed, she had become enlightened. She began to teach. She had schools of meditation and prayer, and, to get people off the wheel of reincarnation. And at her deathbed, she was ready to go off and go into nirvana, which is heaven in Eastern terms, and never come back. And she heard a baby cry. And it touched her heart, her mother heart, so strongly that she stopped and she said, I will come back until all people are opened in their heart. And so she's the first bodhisattva.
Yeah. Wow. I just love that story.
Divine Mother.
So yes, Divine Mother. And so jumping back to the blindfolded bodhisattvas, so they are not aware, that hence the word blindfolded. And I know you also talk about that they're not really expected to come here and learn lessons. They're here to simply elevate simply. They're here to elevate consciousness. And like you just said, to break the cycle of generational hatred and prejudice. So even though if they leave this earthly realm at a young age, they've done their job.
Right. And it's like bringing down a vibration that we've not had before. And it's the door for people who are aspiring to have a higher life on the planet, that's aspiring to have that available to them. Right. The term from blindfolded bodhisattva, which is quite a mouthful. I was watching a documentary and they magicians, and they showed a picture of a little video on Harry Houdini. They blindfolded him, which I perked up, wrapped him in a chain, put him in a bag in a river, and he had to come out on his own. And that's what the blindfolded bodhisattvas have to do.
Right.
They're put in different situations. They have to, on their own, find that spirituality deep within them. They have to do that all by themselves.
Right.
Pieces from whatever faith they were brought into and life and culture, but they really go into an overdrive of inventing a new recipe of their spiritual. So it's like they have to go within to find their spiritual center. So the regular bodhisattva is brought into a culture, into a family that accepts the fact that there are older souls and then puts them with the right teachers to activate them. Whereas the blindfolded bodhisattvas, or what I call now Houdini kids, they have to do it all by themselves, which is really difficult.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that a lot of the kids even coming in the last, decade, more than a decade, last 50 years or so, but especially recently, these kids that do seem a little bit out of place and all of the anxiety and the frustration, and they seem to simply just want to do good. And would you call those kids like silent or Houdini kids?
I described this in my book, this vision I had about how there was a vision I had of me landing in a swamp. And then as I evolved and became more conscious, I emerged from the swamp, and then the swamp turned into grassy land. And I remember, and this was in like late 80s, maybe like 1989 is when I had this vision, or 1990. And I remember looking over my shoulder, I heard laughter, and I turned around and I saw these children, like young teenagers, like 12, 14, 15-year-olds, coming down and hitting the ground that the Houdini kids had solidified. Because by absorbing the negativity and not retaliating, we were transmuting the swamp into grassy, beautiful grassy with these little star flowers on it, land. And so it's interesting because when you start researching Indigo kids came down in the late 80s. So
where did that name come from? From just the chakra?
Yes, it's related to the upper chakra.
Right.
I don't know who coined the term. That's a good question. But at this point today, there are still bodhisattvas being born. There are still Houdini kids being born. And now to add to that, there are these Indigo kids being born. And you're right, these are the children that are 12, 13, 14 that are doing these phenomenal things, like inventing things or conscious, there's a 6-year-old girl who's got a lemonade stand, and she gives half of the money away that she makes to a charity. These are the children, like you said, that it's like they hit the ground running. They're
Right.
born into families that, again, are very supportive of that type of consciousness and cheer them on to develop and better themselves and stand up for the world. I mean, we're very global now. We can't get away from it. If the coronavirus has taught us one thing, we are all connected.
Absolutely.
Something to race around so quickly. Come on, guys, wake up. Let's wake up.
Yeah. So what is the message, do you think, or what can we do, knowing, having this knowledge, to help the very young, trust their inner guidance and to find their way a little bit easier, and just to help them?
That's a really good question. I think that one of the things I was shown was that the change is going to come from like more of a grassroots level. And what I mean by change, it's beginning to manifest heaven on earth. It's not a bad change. It's not a horrific thing. It has to do with the love. And, we've got so many amazing stories from all these just normal little people that are doing these heroic things to help others in these stories. Yes, you have the odd man out that's buying up all the, hand sanitizer, but he's the rarity, which is why he's in the headlines. The good people are not getting the attention simply because they don't need to.
Right.
And any crisis brings us to our highest and our worst, but the majority goes to the highest. And one of the things I believe is that, and we see this time and time again, how consciousness shifts. It comes during crisis. When spirit needs us to focus on God, what's that saying? There's not an atheist in a what are those called? In a war, in a
Right.
they
right.
dug, I can't remember the name of them. Atheists
Yeah.
in a war zone. And from that perspective, if we need a crisis to bring us to God, then Spirit's going to keep giving us a crisis. When we find that light within us, we are drawn to God. We no longer need crisis. And that's a wonderful part of, again, raising consciousness. These children that are coming in, if you have a really gifted child, with mentoring and, of course, monitoring what they're doing, help them do these things, like this 6-year-old girl whose mission is to help this oncology department in a hospital near where she lives. Help them be selfless, because these kids are not being taught. I mean, again, greed is something that we're taught. There's a really interesting study that just came out on why dogs love toddlers, because children automatically give everything away. I mean, toddlers, 2, 3, 4-year-olds have to be taught not to give their ice cream cone to the dog. And it's like they're so selfless that when you see a lot of parenting books or, blogs, they're rather harsh. And there's a way to teach a child who's selfless. Just include yourself in your decisions. And if you do have a child who's selfish, you need to teach them to share. But you can't use the same program for both children because they're very opposite. So one thing is watching the child, and if it's selfless to a fault, then you just teach it how to include themselves in their decisions,
Yes. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So, one thing that I wanted to segue just a little bit, I wanted to talk about the astrological, I don't know if implication would be the word, but how it which was so fascinating, about it and your near-death experience and the names.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. And I have to start by saying whenever I go back into my memories and picture upstairs and the love and the light, and I just start to drift away, I was always, I can't say, I noticed when I was walking up the table that Rao had this beautiful ultraviolet shirt on, purple, beautiful, and then these kind of orangey brown pants. And it struck me odd when you have all the colors of the universe to work with, rich and deep, just so vibrant, and you pick colors that clash. I could never make sense of that. And then one day at Canyon Ranch, we had a man come in, and he's an astrologer. There's a metaphysical department at Canyon Ranch. And he's a metaphysical, he's an astrologer. He does more of the Eastern or Oriental. So we did a trade. I do the tarot cards. I did a reading for him. And he did the I Ching tarot or astrology for me. And he's talking, and I'm laughing because he's talking about my first 30 years. That's when I was supposed to die. And he says, oh my goodness, how did you survive this? You're supposed to die.
He said that?
Yes. And my second 30 years, he looks again around a certain time in my life, early mid 30s. He goes, you look like you die again. And then the last 30 years is going to be heaven on earth. Seriously. And I'm sitting there. He knew nothing about me, and I'm laughing. And finally, I explained to him, I had this near-death experience. I was supposed to die in my early 20s. I opted to stay. And then I did die when I was 36. And and I started to tell him, well, when I got to the names Mina and Rao, he stopped me and he said, have you ever had Ayurvedic astrology done? And I said, oh, once in India, but I don't remember it. And so he said, write down the information, because obviously I know the date and the time. It's like burned into my brain. And he came back the next day and he was like so excited, and he was explaining because Rao is the north node of the moon. And Mina, these are Sanskrit terms, Mina is Pisces. And the north node of the moon goes through Pisces on this particular transit once every 20 years. And it only stays 28 minutes. And in the middle of that 28 minutes is when I had my near-death experience.
Oh my gosh.
And also when I was upstairs and I was talking to Saraswati, I said, why did this happen now? And she had this paper manifest, and she drew it. And then she drew a long V, drew another dot, and drew up to the top another dot. So I've got 3 dots. Looks like a crack in the wall. That's all I could think of. But of course, it made perfect sense upstairs. I went, oh, yes, I get it. Sure. And then I'm like, what was that all about? Well, here I've got Jupiter and Venus at the very top of the Divine Mother and Father, at the very top. And right at the bottom, I've got Pluto, which is Hades. So I get a 28-minute window to slide down into Hades and pop back out with no damage or very little damage. And then the funny thing is without me even I didn't tell him what colors Rao was wearing, but he had written down that everything has a color and a stone in India. So the color of Rao is ultraviolet purple, a beautiful, like knock your eyes out purple. And the stone is hessonite garnet, which is an orangey brown. And I just went, okay, that's
wow.
Even for me, that's woo-woo, because I was like, it's too bizarre. And in the back of the book,
wow.
The chart is there for people who know astrology. They can look at it. But I always recommend if you've had like a really traumatic event, or if you've had a near-death experience, it's not a bad idea to go and have the astrology done for that day. Because as he explained it, it was such an eye-opening. It pulled so many things that I still don't understand.
Wow. So in that sense, I don't consider it woo-woo. It's just more confirmation. Not that you need confirmation by any means, but yeah, I love astrology. I'm going to have an astrologist on soon, and it's just so fascinating. Well, Lesley, thank you again so much for coming on the show. And just quickly, you for those who once again did not watch the show before, Rao was one of her guides when she was upstairs. And could you tell us who Swatsarti? Is that a Hindu?
Saraswati
Yes.
in the Hall of Knowledge. When I went into this room, it didn't look as big from the outside. It was a building, and I was very drawn to it. And when I walked in, all I saw were shelves going up and down the wall from the floor to the ceiling, little tiny shelves and bigger shelves. And I walked over and there were scrolls or books. And it seemed to be, I called it the Hall of Knowledge. And when people talk to it, they say, oh, that's the Akashic Records. Well, apparently that's my hangout place. Remember how I said I like encyclopedias? It's like being encyclopedia. And Saraswati, who I had no idea who she was at that time because I was an agnostic atheist, I didn't even hear her voice. All I heard was music. And she said it a couple times and I still couldn't process it. And she laughed and she said, on earth, they call me Saraswati, who just happens to be in Hinduism, the goddess of knowledge. So I was like, okay. Yeah.
Wow.
In this huge library.
I think I have a feeling I'll end up with those Akashic records too.
Yeah.
Because I'm very much like that.
Well, yeah, we need that kind of information. We need learning,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And once again, if you could tell our listeners how to find you, if they would like to find you and connect with you.
The best way to connect with me is on my webpage, and that's Lesley, Lesley, Joan Lupo, LUPO.com. And
great.
A lot more information about the Houdini Kids. There's you can see me as Cowgirl Lesley. In fact, I'm on the cover of the book. That's one of the pictures that we took.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I'm one of the cowboys on the cover. And it just has a lot more information on it.
Right. Yeah, the book's just amazing. Well, thank you so much. This is a lot to think about and absorb. And I've so enjoyed having two conversations with you now. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So you have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening in today. If you want to learn more about the show, you can find us at interviewswithinnocence.com and on Facebook or Instagram at Interviews with Innocence. Please write me a message, tell me what you liked, and let me know what else you would like to hear. I would love to hear from you. And if you liked what you heard, please leave us an iTunes rating and review. It helps other listeners find the show. Thank you.